Okay, today we're going to talk about one set of the costs of climate change, and that's involved in climate change causing the sea level to rise. So why would the sea level rise with climate change? Well, one of the things that climate change we're pretty sure about is going to increase temperature. And the oceans cover about 2/3 of the globe, and they are going to absorb quite a lot of this extra higher temperature. And what we know is when water gets a little bit warmer, it expands. And so expansion of all our oceans is actually going to push up the sea level. Also, we are pretty confident that a lot of the ice belts in the Arctic and the Antarctic and in other parts of the globe are going to slowly melt. So there'll be additional fresh water finding its way into the oceans. So the combination of the thermal expansion and the melting of ice that's on land will push up the sea level. And estimates are that if we don't change our current behaviour, sea level might be around 0.8 metres higher in the future than it is now. Now that's also an average, because climate change is also going to change wind flows. There's also forever some parts of the globe are rising and some parts are sinking. So the exact sea level rise for any particular coastline is going to vary a bit over time. And of course that makes the task a little bit more complicated. So then we go on and ask ourselves, what are the economic effects of a rising sea level? Well, unfortunately, a lot of our global population live in areas which are very close to sea level. We take Bangladesh, for example. If we get some very high tides or big rainfall, some tens of millions of Bangladeshis are actually flooded. There are estimates that maybe a 0.8 metre rise in the sea level around that Bangladesh area will cause 100 million Bangladeshis to have to relocate. And that's really bad news for the Bangladeshis. They've got to find another country to live in. It's a challenge for those other countries. Is Pakistan or India or China going to welcome 100 million Bangladeshis who've been flooded? So those are real costs for those who are flooded and for those who have to take these extra population in much higher lying areas. We can think of a number of the Pacific Islands. Some of those are actually going to be flooded, and those people are going to have to move to other countries. The challenge of taking their culture as well as their livelihood to another country and then finding another country to accept them are pretty costly and threats to global peace. Those of us in fairly developed countries love to have beach resorts. We've got our second homes on the coast. A lot of those are very close to the sea. A higher sea level and sea surges, when we get big storms, are going to mean the end of an awful lot of wonderful recreational housing and entertainment. That's a major loss. Or alternatively, we can think of countries like the Netherlands, who've protected themselves from sea level for centuries by building dikes. And if there's a leak in the dike, they've been able to plug it with the famous thumb in the dike. But if the sea level is going to go up another 1/2 to 2 metres, then they're going to have to invest in strengthening that dike and lifting it higher. That's a big expense. We're going to be pouring income into building bigger and stronger dikes rather than having fancier cars or smarter houses or building roads for people in Sahara Africa. So these are all major costs. And of course in the process we're going to lose a lot of ports, a lot of roads, a lot of railways, a lot of electricity lines that are located close to these sea levels that are now risen. So that's more money that we have to shell out. Another set of costs is that the life cycle, particularly for fisheries and so on, depends on a very intricate system of mangroves and swamps that have relatively small invertebrates, which are then eaten by prawns, and then fish eat the prawns, and then sharks eat the bigger fish. This sort of cycle goes on and on. Now, if there's a very quick build-up of sea level, many of those mangroves and swamps will not be able to adjust on time. They were able to adjust historically over thousands of years. But we're talking about sea levels rising in tens of years over what took in the past thousands of years. There are real questions that they can adjust fast enough. So that then means a threat to our food system, especially fisheries. But it also could be a threat to an awful lot of biodiversity and environmental amenity. So that we have to worry about. A third potential effect of higher sea level rises is that when you think a lot of our major cities are located very close to the sea line, and they have wastewater systems, they have rainfall runoff that's all designed essentially to run out to sea. Now when the sea level rises up to 1 metre, that stuff's not going to run out to sea, it's actually going to run backwards. And we've seen that happen in Jakarta in late 2012-2013, big sea level rises, and their whole sewage drainage systems just couldn't cope. So how do we get over that? Well, we're going to have to build extra pumping stations, much more sophisticated wastewater treatment and recycling systems. That's billions of dollars of extra costs that we have to find as a result of climate change. We also know that a lot of coastal cities depend on underground water. Some of the cities it's actually for human consumption, in others it's more for irrigation and for protection of local parks and this sort of stuff. What we know is that as the sea level rises, salt water tends to creep further into the inland and will actually intrude into these underground freshwater, or what are now freshwater water supplies. They will then become salty and we will not be able to use them without expensive treatment, or we have to go further inland to build extra dams or invest in desalination, for example. So these are just some of the examples of how climate change with long lags pushes up the sea level, and that causes the way we live in many cases to be completely destroyed. In other cases we have to invest a lot to adjust to this new environment, and that's some of the costs of climate change. And that's what we would look to avoid by reducing our greenhouse gas emissions.